Welcome to another episode of the Missing Link in Your Healing podcast. I feel like I've been away forever. It's so wonderful to be here with you. In the Missing Link in Your Healing, we do exactly what the title suggests. We bring you those things that you may know and may not have applied, or you may not know, that is essential for you to heal in body, mind, and spirit. We bring you a holistic perspective. We draw in work from other people. We have guests. Those of you who have followed us for a while will know that we have guests. And our mission and our purpose is that everyone be empowered to create the healing that they would love for themselves.
Thank you, Loretta. That was a great introduction to our podcast, and I'm so excited to have you back. It does feel like forever that we've been bantering on episodes, so yay. Well, today's topic for episode 56, some might find evocative, some might find shocking, some might find important, and for me, it's one of my most passionate things to speak about. So I'm going to calm down my passion to a slow pace, but I think it is a very important topic. Why does two-step psychology and feel-good spirituality potentially affect our health in a negative way? So that is quite a question. And as I've said, it could be triggering. So let's unpack it. And why are we doing this topic? And why is it so close to our hearts? So spirituality and psychology can undoubtedly support health. We've spoken about that over and over, and we both practice spirituality and use it as part of staying healthy or healing ourselves. The thing is, though, that certain oversimplified or superficial versions can do more harm than good at times, especially, well, to our physical and mental health. And of course, they go together, and actually they can backfire. So in my opinion, as I've stated on a number of other episodes, one of the main triggers, only one, because there's always more than one reason, but in me getting that aggressive cancer in 2017 was I went on a self-help and spiritual bypassing journey of note for 30 years. So I feel that it can even actually be dangerous. Loretta can chip in later and see whether she agrees with that. But I'm going to quote from an amazing psychologist who's also a Buddhist today, who also feels that it can be pretty dangerous when it comes to our physical, mental health. Because the thing is, when we bypass, we don't do the deep inner emotional work. We don't do the deeper emotional work. And we also often ignore our body's needs. So let's see, where are we going with this? And actually, there's a growing critique about this, and we are adding our voice to it, as you know, because this oversimplified self-help and spiritual bypassing is very prolific and being sold very hard out there. And it's used as a substitute, even if unknowingly, by the healers, teachers, and the people using it, but it's used as a substitute for deeper healing. So this episode, let's preface it. I want to preface it by saying it's not meant to frighten you. It's not meant to judge anything out there, but it's meant to awaken, to remind all of us, and I have to keep on reminding myself, that ignoring our inner world has consequences, and that comparison, truth, and self-awareness are not luxuries, but absolute lifelines if we want to stay physically and mentally healthy. So what do we mean by two-step psychology and feel-good spirituality? Well, I stole that from the work of Robert Augustus Masters. I think it was in his How to Take Your Shadow Out of the Darkness, was one of his 14 books. He's a psychotherapist, and he is well known for exploring spirituality, sexuality, trauma, and personal growth. So he's a relationship expert. He sees himself as a psychospiritual teacher as well as a psychotherapist. He defines two-step psychology and feel-good spirituality as approaches that offer us seductive simplicity and quick fixes, but ultimately, unfortunately, fall short of promoting genuine psychological resistance or long-term health and well-being. So just to pull out a little bit more of what he said on feel-good spirituality, he says this is a term, or he uses it as a term to describe a form of spirituality that emphasizes pleasant feelings, serenity, immediate comfort, but while potentially neglecting the deep inner work or the shadow aspects, or it bypasses people taking real world accountability for themselves and their lives. So it can be characterized, he says, it's characterized by focus on positive emotions and transcendence without righteous self-examination and accountability. I repeat myself, but it's important. It relies often on avoidance of challenging topics and feelings like pain, trauma, unresolved inner conflicts. There's a preference for temporary mood elevation over sustained transformative practices that last long term. And all of this, it can be a part of what we use to bring ourselves into a place of peace. There's nothing wrong with meditation or any form of that kind of spirituality. However, we do need to know that it does not lead to long-term real transformation if we're not doing this inside out work based on healing trauma or proper psychological practices. So just to go back to Robert Augustus Masters, he outlined several key reflections which I pulled out of his work. Dismissing this emotional complexity means we oversimplify complex issues and we encourage suppression of real emotions. And this is when it can become very problematic for the body, as Loretta and I have already put out in a few episodes, and Loretta wants to chip in.
I want to chip in case I forget. So,
Sure.
I just want to reiterate what Antoinette said. Of course, it's not that we are not about using spirituality. It's also not that we're not wanting to align ourselves with feeling inspired or wanting to create something or connecting with love. It's that we don't want to do that at the expense of not connecting to the other side. Because, this is a dualistic universe that we live in, and we've always got two polarities. And if we want to heal, if you imagine that, healing is, if you look at the metaphor of a battery, if you want to light a light bulb, imagine lighting the light bulb as the healing. You have to connect the positive and the negative terminal. And you don't have more charge in the positive terminal than you have in the negative terminal in the battery. You have equal charge in the positive and negative terminal. But because human beings are so repulsed from feeling bad, it's a natural tendency for us to want to only connect the positive terminal, and which is why there's no shame in this, because we're all programmed for this, all right? Which is why we need to just be aware of it. That's all. If once we're aware of it, and so also remember that our egos, that part of us that's operating sort of from our wounding and that has this filter of what reality is, it doesn't want the status quo to change, because change inherently means uncertainty, which means a lack of safety. So it's there to protect us. And of course, it does that very subtly. It can do it very obviously, and that's easy to spot. But when the subtlety is that, as long as you're doing the right thing, you must be healing. And sometimes that doing the right thing is avoiding both terminals of the battery. So I just always ask myself, because listen, my ego is a master at at fooling me. It's like, what am I doing right now? What am I avoiding? And sometimes it's very difficult for me to spot it in my emotions. But you know what? I've identified the behavior that indicates that I'm busy suppressing an emotion. So one of those behaviors for me is eating. If I have that constant feeling of always being hungry, and honestly, it's a physical feeling. It's not even like I'm eating and I'm so full I want to burst. It's like I'm so full, and then an hour later, I'm hungry again. I know now that when that's a pattern for me. So I think I'm feeling fine, but my behavior is an indicator for me that I'm actually not okay. And you know what? I've known this for years, and it still sometimes takes me a day, 2 days, sometimes 3 days of the incessant eating before I'm like, Loretta, you know that underneath this eating thing is the anxiety and the fear. But because I'm reluctant to go there, even knowing this, I still sometimes avoid that. Well, until eventually I'm like, "Oh, honestly, so what would you prefer to keep on doing? Would you prefer to have this anxiety around, oh, I can't stop eating, and what does that mean for my body, and da 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 da? Or do you just want to actually sit and look at what's really making you anxious? It's not fun. But the interesting thing is that the minute I'm prepared to just face it, I don't even have to do anything. I just have to be prepared to see it and just acknowledge, well, actually something is really driving me at the moment. The need to eat goes away. So it's not the need to eat for everyone, okay? We all have behavioral patterns, and sometimes those patterns are so smart at covering up the feeling. So that's actually the part that I wanted to bring out here, that it's not you don't feel bad because you're trying to avoid it. We're all trying to avoid it. None of us love it, okay? So just be aware and be attentive.
Yeah, you have a beautiful way of articulating things and contextualizing them in your own journey. And I think that it is a natural reaction of our ego to keep us safe and loved, but it's also scientifically, even spiritually and self-help. We've been born and lived and socialized in a world that says it's right or wrong. It's this or it's that. God is good, evil is bad, but it's actually always both. And one of the reasons we're doing this episode is because I think that complexity, if you want to call it, or that paradox, is what's been overlooked for a very, very long time in many spiritual traditions and self-help traditions, because it's actually by facing the darkness or the suffering, diving into the suffering, where the true transformation comes. So, and interestingly, I want to throw in here something. I listened to a 2-hour conversation online, which I purchased between Robert Faulkner, who is an IFS psychologist, and Paul Levy. If you don't know him, go look them up. And one of the things Robert Faulkner raised, I'd never heard of it before. I don't know if you have, Loretta, it's called the near enemy rather than the far enemy. So talking about these paradoxes, he said, for example, what the world needs right now is compassion to counteract this absolute evil and hatred and separation. And so that the far enemy is evil and hatred of compassion. But what is the near enemy? And this is where we get tricked by our own minds. And he said, for example, and it's so interesting, I'd never thought about this in myself. He said the near enemy of compassion could be, for example, pity or condensation. So we often, we pride ourselves because we're not the hateful ones or pure evil, but we don't realize how tricky and subtle it is, as you said, that it can play out in ways where we can be very judgmental, for example, if you me. So I thought it was very valuable, that term near enemy. So look out for the near enemy, because he says every positive has a far enemy and it has a near enemy. So, interesting, hey? And something you and I recorded a whole episode about, and you talk about often, is toxic positivity. So once again, we're not discouraging positive thinking or positivity. The thing is, I bought into, and I created this for myself, this constant pressure to be upbeat and to be positive and to be grateful and not to feel angry and not to feel fearful. And what did that end up doing with me, within me, unknowingly, till I knew it, was I was feeling guilty. I was feeling ashamed, all suppressed, because I wasn't experiencing the zen and joy all the time. And I was suppressing all these natural emotions that had been sitting there since utero, actually, of really fear and terror and anger. And because every time they came up, I really felt out of line and guilty because I wasn't Zen, because I was a spiritual person.
So, 100%. That is it's so interesting because I have this client who had cancer, and then post the chemo and the surgery and all the sort of conventional stuff. And she was working with me during that time. She went to this very sort of medical and natural kind of clinic where lots and lots of different therapies, right? For this intensive, like for a month intensive. And I had a session with her, and she said to me, the other people, this is the staff and some of the patients, they're so like, oh, I can feel the healing, and we're visualizing the healing happening. And she just said to me, I'm just not feeling it. Like, I'm looking at this and thinking, I'm not feeling that. And she said, the reason why I'm here is because I'm terrified that the cancer is going to come back.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
some people might say, yeah, well, now, that's the problem, right? But I said to her, well done for actually recognizing the truth, because
Mhm.
she could have allowed herself to get sucked into this whole rah. She said to me, she says, there's some people that have got like 2 pages of positive affirmations that they're repeating while they're having their IV, whatever. She goes, I'm not doing that. So 2 things to point out. One, she felt like she was doing it wrong. And interestingly, one of her coping strategies was to be good, like the high achiever, right? To get an A. So if that's your coping strategy and everyone around you is like being like rah positive and you're not feeling it, she feels like she's failing the test. So that's the first thing. So she's pressured because she doesn't think she's doing it right. And because she's fearful that her cancer is going to come back, she feels even more guilty that she's not doing it right. And what happens in your physiology, and we've said this, I've said this a number of times, is that internal pressure, that idea of not doing it right, or feeling guilty because you're not doing it right, or thinking that if you're not doing it right, you're paying all this money and you're investing all this resource, but these therapies aren't going to work for you. What that does is that puts you into sympathetic nervous system overdrive.
Wow.
And so now you're in flight or fight or freeze or fawn. And now you've got an imbalance in your autonomic nervous system, and the part of your autonomic nervous system that's supposed to be doing the resting and the digesting and the restoring and the healing, it isn't part of the equation. And so it's not just that it affects you mentally and emotionally, but it affects your physiology. So, of course, the way in which you're going to necessarily respond to your treatment might be different. So, this is the thing that I said to her, and this is something that I found so liberating when I learned this. Because, listen, I'm by nature a glass half full person. I whitewash everything. That's been one of my strategies. My life is I'm so blessed. Nothing bad's ever really happened to me. I had to like revisit my entire childhood when I went to therapy, because I realized, oh my goodness, not that it was awful. It's just that it wasn't all light and unicorns and wonderfulness because it wasn't dramatically traumatic. Okay. So I really know of what I speak here. And if you ask people who know me and you say to them, is Loretta a positive or negative person? They'd say, oh, she's so positive. Okay. So you've got to be aware that needing to be positive can create enormous stress. So what liberated me was when I learned that your attitude doesn't create your reality, your focus creates your reality.
Oh, wow.
And this was brought in a way where someone said, think of all the masters in art. Beethoven. Do you think Beethoven was like a supremely positive person when he went deaf and couldn't hear his own music? I don't think he was. I mean, I'm making an assumption now, but honestly, who would be? You're a musician. This is your life's work, and you can't hear it. But he composed some of his. Did he stop composing because he was deaf? No, he didn't. Did Mozart stop composing because he was poor? No. Did Van Gogh stop creating beautiful art because he was suicidally depressed? No. So the creative process does not depend on positivity. Of course, if you're feeling positive and it's truly positive, then it's probably easier, but it doesn't mean you cannot create because you're not positive. And this was the conversation that I had with that client of mine. I said to her, in my opinion, you have a much, much better chance of healing because, quite frankly, for someone who's just been through 4 months of chemo and recovering from surgery, to not be scared that the cancer is going to come back, like that is not realistic to me at all. That sounds superhuman. And here's the thing, guys, we don't have to be superhuman in order to heal. We don't have to be superhuman. In fact, I think the most important part is that we have to be real. So there's all this stuff about authenticity. Well, authenticity is about being real with how you really feel. So that client, when my client said to me, I'm not feeling it, and now I'm worried that I'm sabotaging the process. It's like, well, was this choice that you made in alignment with, was when you made this choice, because I know when she made the choice, right? It was part of her vision for her health. Yes. I said, okay, so you know what? You don't need an affirmation because you've got reality. I'm terrified the cancer is going to come back. I feel pressured because I don't feel like I'm like rawly positive enough. It makes me worried because I feel like maybe I'm not as connected to God as what I should be. That's all the truth of where she is. That's true. That's true vulnerability and authenticity because it's real. That's where she is. Okay, but you know what? I said to her, but do you have a vision? And she said, yes, I have a vision. Of course, I know she has a vision, right? Because I've been with her in it. I said, all right, so you know what? You need to be real about where you are. And if you then want to, if you feel like you want to do something, just shift and just connect to your vision for it. You don't have to believe it. Just connect to your vision for a bit because your vision and your reality, the two poles of the battery, both are more powerful than 1,000 pages of affirmations that you cannot believe because they're not true for you. So it's liberating, I think, to know that you don't always have to be positive because who can be positive all the time? It's impossible.
Also, Loretta, it makes us sick. I'm a living case study of
100%.
that. You repress and your emotions. You don't feel your feelings. You don't feel any fear. You don't process the past and your trauma. You're sitting with the potential trigger for thick.
100%.
And that's why we're doing this episode. And in fact, as you suggested, I'm going to do a book review on Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, because he talks in there about how not standing up for ourselves or having our own boundaries or being too nice or not feeling our feelings it's over and over again is the thing he's finding that clients need to change in order to heal or the reason they're sick. So when I got applied psychoneuroimmunology book, that's when I knew where my healing lay. I had been suppressing my emotions my whole life. And so this personality coping mechanism many people have, including me and you, is I want to be the good girl and I want to be liked. I don't want to be out. And that also means when you get into a spiritual and self-help world, for me it was, well, I want to be one of those people, those feel-gooders. So I can't do chemo or I can't be negative. But that was one of the very things which unknowingly made me sick. And I don't know if I've shared this before, but I ended up doing chemo, as everybody knows. And when I went into my first chemo session, I decided I was going to write love and gratitude and put golden sparkles on the chemo bag to transmute all the bad stuff. And this beautiful black nurse there said to me, doing? So I said, no, I want to take all the toxicity out of you so it just heals me. He said, well, don't sparkle away all the healing, because as with I don't advocate chemo, okay? I would never have chosen it unless it was the right thing for me at that time. But the very thing that helped me heal was some of the toxicity in those drugs. So yes, I had a vision and an intention that it would heal me and I would only take on what I needed and leave the rest. But you can't sparkle, meditate, or positive affirmation away the darkness. So, and I mean, Yes.
No? Carry on. And when you're
No, I
done,
was
then
going
I'll
to go
say.
on to the next point, but
Sorry,
maybe
can I
it
just say
helps.
one last thing to this?
Sure.
So another client of mine who had cancer and who did the chemo, one of the things with that particular person was that he was given an exercise when I asked him to identify an emotion and like, where is it in your body? Like, couldn't do it. Found so difficult to do. And very intelligent, very successful, one of those, and very spiritual actually, living from the neck up people. And a simple exercise like close your eyes and like, identify what is the smell in the room? What is the temperature of the air on your skin? What are 5 things that you can name that you could see in the room before you closed your eyes, right? That's all it's forcing you to connect to your body. And he found that simple exercise so difficult because he had just disassociated from his body. And that's what many of us do. And so very often, and remember, your emotions, your feelings, they are physical. They're your thoughts made physical, essentially, right? They're the chemical cascade. They're in your body. So if you find it difficult to connect to what does hungry feel like, what does full feel like, what does the temperature feel like, what is the sensation of the clothing on my skin? Anything that connects you to your physical, like how bad is my pain? Out of a 0 to 10, right? 0 is nothing, 10 is excruciating. Where would you put it? I don't really know. Okay, so that very often when we use this tool, the positivity or spirituality or the feel-good part of it, right? So that we can disassociate from our bodies. And when we've had a lot of trauma, especially if it's been sort of sexual kind of trauma, but any kind of trauma, the safe place where children go is outside of their body because the body is the part that's being hurt, for example, okay, or the part that's unsafe. So this disassociation, it's a protective mechanism, but it protects us in the short term. But in the long term, when we don't recognize that we're disconnected from our bodies, it makes us sick. So that was just a long way of repeating what Antoinette said. Sorry.
No, but it's a very important point you make. In fact, one of the points I was going to come to is disconnection from the body. But this dissociation is actually so much bigger than any of us know. I didn't know until 3 years into my inner healing journey how exceptionally dissociated I was. Actually, and I still have to work on it every day because it's an automatic unconscious coping mechanism for me that just switches in, and now I can recognize it and I can go, no, you're dissociating. And the interesting thing is I was actually using spirituality to dissociate. And when my cancer coach at the time told me all that 2 hours of meditation and zoning out with God is dissociation, I was absolutely furious. But in hindsight, that's exactly what it was, because I could feel high vibrational and peace. I still can. I can tap into that immediately, but I would come back into my life 2 hours later and all hell would break loose because I was living from the neck up. And I was one of those people, Loretta, after 30 years on a self-help and spiritual path, who found it really difficult to connect with anything. And disconnection from our bodies and dissociation from our bodies is so much more prolific than we know, because the thing is, people like me in the past, and even now I find myself in this dance, eat healthy, exercise, meditate, do all that. I never thought I was disconnected from my body. After all, I was eating organic, I was exercising, I was doing all the right things. But boy, was I disconnected from my body, because we mistake, I think, a healthy eating plan and what we feel is a healthy path in life as being connected to our bodies. But true connection with your body, like you say, is feeling all of it. I didn't know what was really going on in my body, actually, because The other point, actually, which ties in perfectly with this, is it can give us a false sense of control. And I've seen that over and over again in the world I used to be in, and I'm still very much surrounded with people like that. We are led to believe that health is entirely in our own hands. And once again, it's this paradox. It's both. Loretta and I advocate being your own healer from the inside out all the time. But the thing is, sometimes we need outside help, whether it's psychological, homeopathic, chemo. And when you're so determined that you can heal yourself and it's all in your control because you're so spiritual and advanced on this path, you start ignoring symptoms and you also often avoid getting proper help. I've seen that. I know people now who've got lumps and they're really, really sick and they just refuse to go to the doctor. So it's all about balance and about both, actually. Yeah. So I'm going to take a direct quote from Robert Augustus Masters' book called Spiritual Bypassing. The subtitle is When Spirituality Disconnects Us from What Really Matters. And actually, Loretta and I decided this morning we are going to do some book review episodes. So I'm going to review this book at some stage. So he says, when transcendence of our personal history takes precedence over intimacy with our personal history, spiritual bypassing is inevitable. To not be intimate with our past, to not be deeply and thoroughly acquainted with our conditioning, our socialization, our trauma, and its originating factors, keeps all of this undigested, unintegrated, and therefore very much present, even if it's unconscious. And by the way, we're not judging spiritual bypassing because, as he says, and I'll tell you, we all spiritually bypass. There isn't a person on the planet that doesn't, you know. The thing is to be aware that using spirituality as a quick fix or quick fix psychology or self-help does not mean that you actually escape your psychological issues. So we are advocating rather for integrating spiritual practice with authentic and most often uncomfortable inner work. I know there's a lot of discomfort, but on the other side of that lies the carry on, Loretta. Yes.
I just want to say that I just want to put the sort of another sort of polarity in there, because we're talking about toxic positivity and we're talking about bypassing, chasing the feel good quick fix so that we can avoid the pain. In my opinion and in my experience, sometimes people do therapy or support groups or whatever it is, and they keep on talking about their wound. And so they feel like they are actually this thing about, you know, getting intimate with your past. Sorry, that part of that quote just triggered this thought for me, right? They feel like they're being really intimate with their past because they tell their story over and over and over. And in fact, they define themselves based on their wound very often, all right? And then they connect with other people who have similar wounds. Now, I'm not knocking support groups either, right? I'm just using this as an example. And so we think that because we are reliving or re-talking about the trauma, we are intimately connecting with it. Sometimes the constantly talking about it is also a type of bypass, because you can talk about it without feeling it. You can talk about it as a this is your ego's way of going, well, you know, you are working on it because, you know, you're talking about this every week or however you're doing it, right? I'm not knocking the talk therapy. For me, I was in therapy for 3 years. And eventually I realized it was time for me to get out because I was navel gazing. I was looking, I was so entranced by having found this other side of my whitewashing my life story. And then I realized, okay, Loretta, now you're doing the same thing. You're just on the other side of the spectrum. The in-between part was incredibly helpful for me. Don't get me wrong, right? Those 3 years of therapy changed my life. But I realized, okay, now I'm just repeating the same thing over and over. And in fact, I'm like in this loop where This has now become my new narrative. And this is not healthy either. So, so just be aware, being able to intellectualize your experience. This is what happened to me. This is why I have X and Y coping strategy, because I had X and Y trauma that then triggered this belief, and this is my coping strategy. The part that we've avoided in all of that is, how did my little child feel? And it was never safe to have those emotions. And unless I can, have compassion, instead of going, oh my goodness, yes, that's my bloody limiting belief. I'm like, okay, I'm in my coping strategy, which means that my little girl is feeling unsafe right now. Can I have compassion for the grown ass me who is part of that little me, is part of me? Can I not judge where I am right now? And can I just actually acknowledge the truth of what am I thinking? And I'm going to say, more importantly, what am I feeling? And can I give myself permission to feel it now? Because it wasn't safe then, but is there a way that I can make it safe for myself now? And sometimes you can't make it safe for yourself, which is where you need help. You need someone to hold that container for you so that it can be safe, so that you can learn, to make it safe for yourself, right? But that part, we can't discount that. So I just want to point out
100%.
that you might be saying, yes, well, I am facing all my shadow. Sure. Are you feeling it? That's all I'm saying. Are you feeling it in your body with compassion for yourself, not judging it? Because that's,
in fact, my very next point was, when we dismiss emotional complexity by oversimplifying complex issues, and this encourages people to suppress emotion. So that woundology thing is a big thing. We need to recognize the wound and uncover it and talk about it. But as you say, we can pendulum swing to the opposite. And that also bypasses doing this real deep inner work. So and that's why.
Can I just add one other thing? Sorry,
Yes,
can I add one other
course.
thing? Sorry, as you're talking. So what's interesting about that, and this is what I've seen with lots of people who are really sick, right? So your signs and symptoms, they're unconsciously, and they're an part of getting sick is to wake you up. But part of getting sick for some people is also, I just want to say this correctly, right? It's an attempt to get a need met that you would be unable to meet if you were healthy. What I mean by that is, just as an example, right? So this is unconscious. Okay, so just hear me out. So if, for example, you're in an incredible, and I've seen this more than at least 5 times in my with people who've been really sick, is that the relationship that they're in is incredibly contentious. One of them gets really ill, usually like cancer, okay? And the spouse becomes more kind, more concerned, more involved, okay? So now, so that is, so the original person did not get cancer so that they could heal their relationship. This is not conscious. But one of the, I'm going to say, benefits, side effects, all right, is that it might make the relationship better. I'm just using the relationship as an example, right? Or you're stuck in a job that you detest, and then you get really sick, and so you give up the job, right? Because you're forced to, because you don't have a choice. So now here's the thing. We have to be very careful that we can see how this has benefited us, and that we realize that this is not the only way to get that need met, is really what I'm trying to say. Because if unconsciously there's a connection between getting this need met, freedom from the job you hate, but in order to get the freedom, you needed to have a disease. Can you see that it's very difficult for you to keep the freedom, because the benefit is associated with the illness. And very often that leads us to unconscious. This is all unconscious. Keep the illness. Because without the illness, you can't have the freedom. Or without the illness, you can't have the kind spouse, for example. You can.
Loretta,
Mhm,
I think that's the gift, actually, in illness. If we look for the gift in it, is that if we go on this journey to do this
mhm,
work to really
mhm,
heal, we
mm.
start recognizing not that we caused our illness, because no one
100%.
does that deliberately, but that in order to heal, we need to change our patterning and the way we have relationship or how we live in the world. So that might include recognition. I mean, none of us creates our illness to get attention or anything, but it's the body's way of saying something here needs to change. So I
Yes,
know
I
you
agree
and
with you.
I always debate this a little bit
No, no,
because
no, no. I
I
think,
I agree with you, but I
yeah,
think as long as we're not making people think that they caused their illness because they want
no,
attention from their husband, but once
100%.
you have
No.
illness, the body is saying to you, ah, okay, well, now my husband's giving me attention, but
Mhm.
actually I should have demanded that attention or drawn boundaries to get it in the first
Exactly.
place. And then, because that's also not, even if that is unconsciously a reason we get sick, there's never just one reason.
No, for
I
sure.
mean,
100%. No, no,
yeah.
no, no, 100%. I agree with you 100%. And I think that the part that you just said is this is the part is that you recognize, look here now, in my relations, this illness has freed me from this job that I hate. All right. So what is it that kept me? The net you know you recognize you've got the benefits, and then the work is to say, okay, why did I stay in the job I hated initially? Well,
Mm,
because I needed to be the good girl, or I thought I had to
mm,
achieve. Now you start identifying, as you say, the patterns. Sorry, that's the point I was trying to make, is that
yeah. And that
sometimes what
is
we
the
do is
real gift.
that's the
Is
gift.
illness.
Yeah,
Actually, if
because
you start doing that work, then
yes.
you transform your life, not just your physical health. Yeah.
Because if you don't do that work, then you have to have the illness in order to have the gift. What happens when you heal? Unconsciously, I think we're scared that we'll lose it. So, but when you ask the second question, how did this? So let's use the example of the spouse. If your spouse becomes kinder and you start communicating more clearly with your spouse, and you feel that you're capable of actually expressing your needs to your spouse,
Mm,
now the degree of communication that you have with your spouse starts altering. When you realize, you know what, before the gift is that I can articulate my needs, and in articulating my needs, I can actually forge a connection with this person. So now you don't have to have cancer. You just have to be aware that your default is not articulating your needs, but you've learned a new way of navigating your way through this relationship. Because then you don't need then you can go, the cancer gave me the gift. I have taken that gift and I've used it to transform how I operate in my relationship or relative to my work
Yeah,
or
I
whatever.
mean, for me, it was giving up my business and changing my life, and I never for one second considered that I created cancer. But I did know once I got it that I was
100%.
responsible for healing it, and that part of healing it was healing my life on multiple levels, including not
Mm,
having, not hanging in a business where I was making big money, but I hated what I was doing because our
100%.
minds trick us. You know, they go, "Oh, you can't retire for another 5 years. You just got to keep going, keep going."
Mm,
Kaboom! You get
yeah,
stage 4 aggressive cancer and you nearly die, and you go, "What am I doing? I might not have 5 years." Anyway,
100%.
so yeah, it's and the other interesting thing Simone Stein brought up in that episode we did on how in utero and childhood trauma causes adult illness,
Mm,
and this is part of her work and the back pain guy's work, is that our brain often creates pain or even illness in our bodies, allergies and stuff, to distract us from feeling emotions or facing some exiled past or energies. And I can honestly say that's true in my life. I had not had chronic pain like she talks about, but I can see even now how my brain starts creating a distraction for me. It is eating, by the way, for me as well. It's surprising how many of us eat to distract ourselves. I stopped the alcohol, but I'm still dancing with the food. But my brain also distracts by going, oh, you got that little red rash again, panic. Oh, what is it actually that I'm not feeling here? Or what thought have I just had? So it's quite multifaceted and complex, this. But I think the bottom line of what we're saying is we cannot bottle up stress. We cannot deny that the hidden stress that we don't see as stress, the coping mechanisms, the being too nice, the not drawing boundaries, the people pleasing, we can't deny that that kind of thing is potentially going to play a big role in making us sick. So healing requires confronting the pain, not bypassing it. I mean, we're very much on that page. So constantly striving to be upbeat. Yeah, you've talked about it, but we also mentioned that it can make you feel guilty, and that was a very big thing for me, because I never felt deep sadness, oh, grief. Talking about feeling deep feelings in this Robert Faulkner and Paul Levy thing I've just done, he said one of the reasons the world's in this global psychosis is that we have not felt our grief, human beings. He said this wave of grief that people have in them that everybody's fighting to stave off. And he's not just talking about the grief of losing your husband to death or the grief of your family in a war, you know, in Israel. He's talking about this internal grief in all of us, grief from parts of ourselves that we've lost, or there's so many griefs and we have not been encouraged. In fact, we've been encouraged to dissociate from that overwhelming crying and sadness. And so I think what we're really trying to say is if you trying constantly to be upbeat, there's a positive side to that, but we also don't want to be bypassing feeding the feelings and ignoring social, economic, relational, and biological factors, you know, as psychoneuroimmunology says, because they can lead to illness. And in Gabor Mate's book, I'm going to do a whole episode on it, he just focuses all the time on relationships, on how you are in the world, how you relate to the world. So, yeah. We don't want to give ourselves a false sense of control either. We've already said this, but these approaches, we just have to be careful that they don't imply that we're just going to be fine now. I mean, eating's one of those things. I thought because I had the eating thing taped and the meditation exercise, I was never going to get cancer. Well, I had to learn the hard way. Okay. So don't ignore your symptoms. That's another thing we can do when we're on this trajectory. It's interesting because people like me, Loretta, as you know, we focus too much on our symptoms sometimes, you know, because our mind creates symptoms to distract us. So we're constantly like, oh, I'm not okay. Now I've got another pain. Now I've got a lump in my breast. Oh, do I run off to the doctor? What do I do? I mean, that's what a lot of people are like that. But by the same token, many people just completely avoid looking at their symptoms and pretend they don't exist until it's like way too late. So,
I actually have I have a client like
yes.
that who had cancer a number of years ago, and then came to see me because the cancer had come back, and I just asked, so you know, how did you find it? Like, how did you find the next one? And she was like, no, well, you know, there was some changes in my scar, and then and then she said, and then my nipple became inverted. This is all over time, eh? This is in the same breast that had the cancer. Changes in my scar, the nipple inverted over time, and then eventually my nipple, my breast was like pulling to one side. And I was like, at which point did we go to the doctor? She goes, no, only by the time it started pulling to one side. And so in my mind was like, you had breast cancer. The scar changed. I'd have been at the oncologist like a shot, all right? But her strategy, her coping mechanism in the world, logic, is an avoidance one. Something that she learned in childhood to deal with whatever it is that was going on with her and her mother was to escape into a dream world where she, you know, either read like fantasy stories or she lay and watch the clouds make beautiful patterns in the sky. And, you know, a dream. She was a dreamer. That was her strategy. So it's no shame on this. It's so interesting because I'm thinking medically, you know, I mean, like the textbook, it's like if there's a change in the scar, if the nipple inverts, you must know there's a problem, right? And then, but she didn't do that either. She went to it was like the next stage of symptoms. I'm like, how? Until we started working together and started seeing that this is a pattern. This is a pattern that she has to keep herself safe. Another very common pattern in this distraction is to push through. You have the pain. You know you've got the pain. You know it's bad. You're not, but you know, you've got to meet the next deadline. So what you do is you just go harder. You just exercise through it. You move beyond it, right? You see this in a lot of people who do lots of sports, or even people who are recreational sports, who are like runners, you know. I'm thinking of people who do like long endurance kind of things. I notice in myself, I have a twinge in my shoulder, then I think, oh no, I really do have to work out today because, you know, it's part of my plan. And I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, actually, and then it's not fine. So yeah, the distracting ourselves by avoiding, we can either push through it, or we can just pretend it's not there, or we can be hyper vigilant, and then we can get distracted by the thoughts in our mind that, you know, if you've got a rash, then before you know it, your mind has created that you've got this like terminal illness and you've got 3 weeks to live. So it's all about how far from the midline you go. And it can
it's all about balance, isn't it? And
100%.
it's about balance, and it's about both, because we have to be vigilant, but we can't be hyper vigilant about our
exactly.
pain.
So I think that the key is just, you know, what are the results that you get? That's sort of how I judge it. I'm like, you know, what results am I getting right now? How am I feeling? I'm not feeling great. I'm not feeling great in my body, or I'm feeling unsettled. I'm like, okay, so that doesn't mean I'm going to now take 3 hours and go on a deep dive. I'm just like, okay, well, I'm feeling unsettled. Well, you know, that's something that I need to be looking at as I move through my day. Can I identify what is actually going on? This takes some practice. Most people who've never done this can't do this. You can't do this without learning how to do this. And it takes some practice, but like anything takes practice, right? And here's the thing, you don't have to be like a virtuoso concert pianist. You just need to be able to play, I don't know, Mary had a little lamb with 2 hands. Anyone can learn how to do that, okay? So because the more you practice it, the better you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, I think we say this in almost any episode, but it has to be said. It all starts with compassionate self-awareness, because it's taken me years and years and years to develop the ability to just recognize that something's actually going on. I mean, Robert Augustus Masters got this beautiful little quote that I love. He says, just beware of dissociation in holy robes. And I still find myself like, it's something we really have to watch out for, but it starts with just self-awareness, because we're also on the go. Even if we're not busy, we mentally doing wow, a lot of us. So holistic health requires integration, not escape. So I think we've got more to come with this topic on book reviews. And I don't know, Loretta, do you want to throw anything else in here? We've had quite a profound conversation.
I think I've said everything that I need to say for today. I don't have anything burning, so you can see my finger isn't. You notice I put my finger up and I lean forward when I really have something to say.
I think you were pretty on fire, which is absolutely wonderful, because everything you bring is amazing. So we've done so many episodes that you could thread back to if this has resonated with you, you know, from an episode on hidden stress to unconscious coping mechanisms and how they affect our health, to Simone Stain's episode on how the brain distracts us through pain and illness. So just go and scroll back to our previous episodes. There's too many to mention. And please share this, because this is very, very important information right now. I got contacted by a woman in America. Her 12-year-old daughter has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the one I had, but it's already gone to her liver, metastasized to her liver and kidneys. She's 12. There's never been a more important time for this information shared. So if this resonates, please share it.
Absolutely.